Okay, so welcome everybody. Um, this is our final conversation for the year. It's actually our 27th, so I see a lot of familiar faces, so thank you for joining us again, and we'll be back next year. And today we have a wonderful guest, and let me introduce her in one moment. But before I do that, let me just acknowledge the National Science Foundation, who are in part supporting this effort, and the organizers, Linda Boyle, John Lee, Rafaela Sadoun, Manfred Cheligi, and Ora Chair and myself are here. So we're recording this. Questions in the chat, please, and or will be moderating that. So it's wonderful to have Saiph Savage here with us today. She's co-director of the Civic Innovation Lab at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and also the director of the HCI Lab at West Virginia University. So she explores crowdsourcing, social computing, and civic technology. She was recognized as one of the 35 innovators under 35 by the MIT Tech Review. And her work's been covered by the BBC, Deutsche Welle, New York Times, and now us. So, all right. So with that imperfect joke, so Saiph, you explore AI, and if I understand it correctly, it's not the AI algorithms, but you look at the human effort, and that has to go on for AI to work. So can you give us a brief overview of what type of human work that is currently utilized by the various AI systems and that we might be perhaps familiar with? What do humans do on a day-to-day basis that makes today's AI work?
So a few of the tasks that humans do is labeling images. These labeled images will be then fed into a supervised machine learning model so that the supervised machine learning model can understand, for instance, the world around them. And so these gets fed into autonomous vehicles so that they can better navigate the world. Other types of tasks that these workers do is transcribing audio. For instance, maybe it's audio that is going into Alexa. Other types so that Alexa can better understand what exactly the person is saying. Other types of tasks can also involve having workers read to Alexa. Why is the worker reading to Alexa? Oh, so that Alexa can now understand a wider range of accents. And so yesterday I gave a talk, and one of the crowd workers was talking about how she has an accent from rural West Virginia, and so she gets asked a lot to read to these autonomous agents so that they can understand her accent. Other types of tasks involve labeling content from websites. So for instance, a worker might be labeling, oh, this image has pedophilia, this image involves hate speech. And so through this, the end user is not going to be shown any type of hate speech websites or websites filled with pedophilia.
Got it. So we certainly don't have this fully functioning, independent, even specialized intelligences, let alone general intelligences. So they need human help. And I think the interesting point that you make is that humans who make AI work are invisible. So their work is invisible, which is actually a good thing, right? In a sense, it makes it a seamless experience. But then there are problems. So I was wondering if you could tell us, what are these problems?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Hiding workers makes sense because at the end of the day, the customer only wants the experience. They don't need to know what is going on behind the scenes. Some of the problems are that this has facilitated, on one hand, having workspaces where workers are paid less than minimum wage. So we did a study on Amazon Mechanical Turk where we followed hundreds of workers for over 2 years. And what we found was that their hourly wage was around $2. And so this is much less than the minimum wage, which is $7 in the US. Other types of problems that exist is that since nobody cares about the workers, is exactly because they're not visible, nobody is thinking about skill development for them. And so workers are stuck in doing jobs that maybe are not able to provide them with ways in which they can develop themselves.
Got it. And so what you're saying then is, how do we address these problems? And one way that you're proposing to address it is through what you call solidarity brokers. So I was wondering if you can explain this idea to us.
Yeah, so I've been developing primarily systems where workers can collaborate with each other, share advice, and through this, they're building solidarity with each other so that they can go after different goals that they set forward. So perhaps some of the goals can involve developing their skills, earning higher wages, maybe fighting together to change certain conditions in their market and in the marketplace in which they are working. Here I'm using AI in order to learn the best type of strategies for organizing workers to go after the different goals that they set forward.
And then another idea that you proposed is this idea of entrepreneur blocks. So what would those be?
So you could also think about that you get workers to start to develop their skills. That's great. But at the end of the day, if the AI is evolving, it might be that the AI is going to replace them anyway. And so this is why I started to also think about, well, maybe we could also help workers to develop other types of skills. For instance, these more creative skills. And so here I have been studying ways in which we can guide workers on one hand to be able to propose new ideas. And then I've also started to explore tools through which workers can propose their own gig markets. And it also might be that workers identify certain problems or gaps that might exist in the current in what currently exists, and so I'm empowering them to be able to create their own gig marketplaces.
So it's really interesting because so it's sort of not a zero-sum game, first of all, right? I think that's one of the messages of your work, right? Is that there's a way to get together and make it better for everyone. And
Yes.
then also, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and I love actually what you mentioned about it's not a zero-sum game. And I think that there we also are doing a lot of work related to changing mentalities. And so one of the things to consider is that a lot of the algorithms that exist on these digital labor platforms very much focus actually on getting workers to compete with each other. And so I think that it's important on one hand to realize how these algorithms might be manipulating workers so that they are competing with each other, so that they can step back and rethink about, so we can also rethink, we can question those algorithms, and we can maybe tell workers about how they can work together instead of against each other. Uber, for instance, in their surge pricing, how their surge pricing is working is that they set up drivers to be able to compete against each other. And so it could very well be that Uber organized the drivers so that they may be optimized to reduce the amount of time that they are without passengers. But it really is set up more so that the driver feels the other driver as their competition. And so I think that it's important to be able to audit these algorithms to see how they might be manipulating workers, and then have conversations with workers so that they can also realize about why it might be better for everyone to work together instead of competing.
And on the idea of workers proposing their own ideas, so I guess what you're saying is that there are these strengths that they bring to the table, right? And I guess you're trying to build on those. So any particular examples there that you might be able to give us? So you mentioned gig markets. So how would that work? Or do you have any other example perhaps?
Yeah. So for instance, it might be that suddenly workers are, let's say, working on Uber, and they might suddenly realize that a certain neighborhood maybe has a lot of dogs. And yet they're locked up at home. And so we can empower the worker, because maybe they're driving through that neighborhood. We can empower the worker to now say, oh, you know what, I'm going to create my own little marketplace, so that workers can so that these homeowners can contract workers to walk their dogs. And it's because this worker might be identifying that gap that exists, and also they have certain digital skills, certain gig literacies that help them in order to be able to put up this business. For instance, they might understand a little bit about how to recruit other workers to join them, what are the best ways for them to present themselves so that the clients will get involved with them. And so that's some of the things that we're building on. In terms of gig markets, it's also, we're asking workers, our interfaces, my interfaces guide workers to provide advice, so that workers share the advice that they have with each other, and they can build with each other. Actually, right now, my student, I remember, Andrew, that you asked me to also involve my different students. My student Carlos Toxley joined the call. So he was the one actually that developed the interface for the gig markets, to allow workers to develop the gig markets that they want. I don't know, Carlos, if you would like to share a little bit about this tool that you built.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think the first point of developing that tool is understanding what are the needs from people that want to start a gig market, and what different types of ideas are out there, and how are the needs that people are covering with these ideas, and implementing and setting up the platform in certain ways. So yeah, basically the first step is getting all the knowledge of what people is asking for marketplaces, and what are the needs behind, and how people configure the tool. And yes, and the second step is basically the deployment, and how do you run a platform of that way. But yes, we did this analysis to first understand what people did. Mhm.
Great, thank you. So if it's okay, I'd like to take some questions from the audience that very much relate to this topic. So Carlos, Albert's just kind of asked how these new tools and new ideas relate to kind of old ideas. Albert, do you want to kind of jump in and elaborate?
Yes, so I think this is, it's a really fascinating topic. And I think having had the discussion about Uber in Europe in different countries, which obviously has in parts strong regulations and strong unions, I think a lot of the ideas unions have, the power of basically the workforce. They could work, but at the moment there are no tools out for that. So I give you one example. So I think Uber on total has enough drivers, but Uber on a Saturday night in Bellevue has only a very limited. So basically, if Uber drivers would decide on Saturday at 7 o'clock, for the next 2 hours, we're not taking any passengers, that would put a lot of pressure. And I think this is, if you look back how union works, it's basically sort of the companies have enough workforce, but usually they are not flexible in deploying it. Yeah. And I think this is sort of, if you talk about crowd workers who can be anywhere, I'm very pessimistic about the union idea. If you talk about crowd workers who have either special skills or have to be in a special place, I think sort of creating platforms to empower people to connect is probably could go all the way to really sort of putting nearly an equal power. But I think this is sort of just coming from a very European sort of side of view.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very good point about how you're absolutely right that in Uber, if workers were able to organize, it would have a very large effect on the company. And maybe that's also why they their algorithms, I think, are creating even more competition than what crowd workers are exposed to. Because, for instance, crowd workers have the power to select the type of tasks that they want to do, if they do certain tasks or not. Whereas in Uber, they have much less control over even the routes that they're selecting, with what passenger do they decide to get paired with. And maybe you're absolutely right. Maybe they are doing this intentionally in order to really limit the type of collaboration that workers can do together, because it can be dangerous for the company. But I think that it is important for us to realize how these algorithms are functioning so that we can, as maybe the public, also have conversations with these companies about what it means. What does getting workers in competition with each other mean for workers, also for the business, and also even for the passengers, the client themselves.
Thank you. I think that Akash has a related question, kind of thinking about gig marketplace versus kind of alternatives for gig workers. Akash, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, that's right. So thank you for the talk. I completely agree that there's a need for the workers to develop skills moving forward. But I had a question about like whether promoting alternative gig work for the workers is the right it would be the right thing to do. And I was wondering to hear your thoughts on it, especially considering that one of the biggest problems with gig work, whether it be Uber or Amazon Turks, is that the benefits and harms are quite skewed, right? Like it mostly benefits larger corporates, whereas the harms of not developing the skills or like having to sacrifice a lot of time on the work is with the, like for in case of Uber, is with the driver. So considering that, I was wondering what Dr. Savas thought about promoting gig work as an alternative for the workers.
Yeah, actually, some of the things that we're also looking at is more creating tools that operate within existing gig markets so that we can repurpose them to facilitate the collaborations that workers want. So for this purpose, we are developing web plugins. The web plugins allow us to bootstrap off of existing digital labor platforms, and on them, we're organizing workers so that they can create the workspaces that they want. And I actually agree a lot with what you said, that many times it doesn't make sense to have to get workers to become entrepreneurial and create their own spaces. And this is why we are also exploring the option of these web plugins. I don't know, Carlos, if you want to share anything related to the web plugins, or if you also want to respond to the question. And that's a great question about why does it make sense or not make sense to have these independent gig markets?
Yeah. I think some of the benefits of having this web plugins, it's basically the web plugins have access to the current gig marketplace, the platform. So it can detect all the tasks that are available. It can organize in a sense in which you can earn more. For instance, in Amazon Mechanical Turks, there are tons of tasks, but if you have tools that are organizing the tasks that are more related to your expertise and the ones that have a better wage or payment. So yeah, you can earn more money and you can invest your time smartly with the help of these tools.
Great, thank you. So I know that in our community, a lot of the research that we're doing is kind of drawing upon these invisible crowd workers. And Peter had a question about informed consent and informed consent within this context. Peter?
Sure. So I do a little bit of machine learning work, but it's not my main work, which is maybe why I can afford to do this. But in my recent projects, I've been thinking like, what if for the data sets, like I'm doing vision stuff, we applied the standard of informed consent and said that if I'm training an AI on data, I want everybody who's in that data to give informed consent that their data is going to be used for AI, right? That would drastically change the shape of what people are doing these days. My question to you is, do you think that that's a reasonable standard to try to apply or to push for applying? And then do you think that that kind of sort of supply pressure would then help maybe raise wages for the workers who are then potentially supplying the data that you're not going to scrape off of YouTube or whatever you're doing these days?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that raising visibility about who are the workers who are on these platforms, also raising visibility around the type of labor conditions that they're exposed to, can help to change the conditions. So we could even think about AI that has certain badges. So similar to clothes, where it says, oh, this labor was done by people who are not this work was done with fair labor. We could think about having something like that, these types of badges on AI platforms as well. I think that's a great idea for changing the wages, making people uncomfortable, the companies uncomfortable, so they start to want to change.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, if I may. you talked about the workers who are labeling the images. Have you thought about where those images are coming from as well as like an additional dimension to this?
Yeah, so a lot of these images are coming from different startups and also different large tech companies as well. And some of the things that we have looked at is, on one hand, when we're thinking about employers, we have also thought about systems through which we could nudge employers to be fairer with workers. And so one of the problems that exists, especially on gig markets, is that employers are unfair in how they evaluate workers. And so we recently explored platforms that could detect when an employer was being unfair, and so that they could redo their evaluation. Carlos was actually leading this platform, which we also use web plugins, so that way we could bootstrap off of the different marketplaces. I don't know, Carlos, if you want to discuss that system.
Well, I think that part of the explanation I already gave, but yeah, I think that the idea of having the technology in the proper place and that can cover the needs of the workers can enhance the experience. So yeah, but basically, yeah, this is why we have been working with all these tools.
Thank you.
So related to fairness, Sandy has a question related to kind of fairness in the context of upskilling and increasing productivity. Sandy?
Oh, hello. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wasn't expected to have to appear on camera. Apologies. So I've had conversations with some colleagues in a business school where I am about this idea of upskilling, because I think it's great, and the idea that people can become more productive and then hopefully make more money for their efforts is really good. But they're traditionally trained economists, and they always say to me, well, if you upskill everyone, then the differences in productivity are where people are able to command premium wages. So we know there are some crowd workers who are exceptionally skilled and efficient. They're often able to command premium sums as a result. And the economists always seem to tell me that if we made things better for everyone, then all that would happen is the wages would fall, which for me is super depressing. And I was just wondering, what your take was on that. I mean, the idea that we could upskill folks and it would actually make no difference in the long term makes me very sad. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
So on one hand, when you upskill, you increase the wages because workers, especially when we're thinking about jobs like Amazon Mechanical Turk, where people are paid to do certain tasks, and it doesn't necessarily, and it depends more on how long it takes the person to do the task, so that they get a certain hourly wage. So in that setting, when workers develop their skills, they would become faster at completing tasks, and so they would be able to do more tasks in less amount of time for the same amount of money that it might take them if they took an hour. And so that would increase their wages. And so in the settings for Amazon Mechanical Turk, where workers can decide, have the power to decide what tasks they're going to do, I don't think that there it would necessarily decrease their wages, because they're becoming faster, and so their hourly wage is also going to increase. I think the other thing is, maybe it's there has also been conversations around that if workers, one of the things we've been studying a lot, workers who earn high wages versus workers who are not making those high wages. One of the biggest difference that we're seeing is that the workers who make high wages are able to identify the tasks that they should not do. And so I think actually that if workers became more skilled, maybe the employers who are paying badly would be drained out. So I don't know if it would be true that having workers increase their skills would necessarily mean that we're going to lower the salaries. I think that maybe it would help workers to be able to drown out bad paying employers.
Thank you. So I'd like to kind of take a step back. We talked a lot about invisible workers today, and I'd like to perhaps ask a question that make them a little bit more visible. And if you can tell us, who are the invisible workers that power AI? What do we know about them in terms of demographics? And perhaps what are the changes in demographics and population that COVID-19 brought?
Yeah, so in general, the invisible workers are workers who are, well, the ones that I'm calling invisible workers are the ones that are completing micro tasks to help power our artificial intelligence. These tasks can involve labeling images, doing audio transcriptions, many times tagging, for instance, content, and some of it. And so originally, a lot of people believe that these workers were maybe from India primarily, and they're doing this for fun. But actually recently, what we're seeing is that the majority of workers who are, for instance, on Amazon Mechanical Turk are actually based in the U.S. The other thing that we're finding is that there are barriers to join these crowd work platforms. And because there are barriers, this means that you can't just do this for fun. You can't do this for fun because you're never actually going to gain good wages if you're just doing it for fun. And so this forces people to turn it into their full-time job. And so we are also seeing that the workers who spend long-term on the platform are working full-time. And several of them just dedicate their lives to Amazon Mechanical Turk. And they have to dedicate their lives to Amazon Mechanical Turk because it takes significant time to become an expert in that platform. And they're actually not working on other platforms. So we also surveyed them to understand, like, if they're maybe they could work on Uber or other types of gig platforms. We found that the ones on Amazon Mechanical Turk just stayed on Amazon Mechanical Turk, and they weren't changing into other spaces. We also did a survey actually during COVID, asking them how their work had changed due to COVID. Crowd workers actually didn't express that COVID hit them. And so most of them, what we did get was the ones from the city, for instance. There we had people from the city express that they would do Amazon Mechanical Turk in free time that they had in their main job. And so we did have that, and now they said, oh, now I'm at home working on Amazon. Now I have to do things at home from working at Amazon. So that was one of the main changes that we were seeing, but workers didn't express that COVID had hit them significantly. We are studying how COVID is hitting gig workers. And so, of course, ride sharing was affected. Also, caregiving was affected. And yeah, and we're also interested in seeing how workers, if they transition to other jobs based on like the fact that COVID hit them. Right now, we don't have clear evidence about what is happening into these job transitions. But what I can say is that for Amazon Mechanical Turk, we are not seeing actually that much mobility. And it might be because Amazon Mechanical Turk requires very specialized skills.
Thank you. I think it's really helpful to have this understanding. I think that Carlos has a question about the differences between platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk to worker-owned crowd work. Carlos?
Hi everyone. That was a really interesting talk. I just wondering, you mentioned something about trying to imagine what a sort of worker-owned platform could look like, and I wonder if you could expand on that. So it sounds a quite a fascinating concept, particularly, as some collectives that have already been developed in other countries, specifically with like location-based gig work. So I wonder what this concept could look like online.
Yeah. So right now we're looking at two types of worker-owned platforms. On one hand, Amazon, I actually don't know if you guys are aware, but has created the idea of vendors. So vendors are basically small companies that come on in and bring a workforce to Amazon. And Amazon is now going to be connecting them with a series of other companies that can request their services. And so on one hand, you could think about those vendors as a type of worker-owned platform. Right now, we were actually thinking about what types of tools we could give these vendors so that they could better present themselves to connect with the different employers that Amazon could match them with. And so here it might be like workers, again, uniting to deliver services together, maybe that follow the different motivations that workers can have. Other types of worker-owned platforms was so the ones that we were doing with my student Carlos. He said that his machine got stuck, and so he'll return. But there, basically, what we were doing was that we created we also used plugins from WordPress. And so it became similar to when you create websites. Workers would just have to configure the small form, and through the information that they gave the form, they were able to tell the platform the type of gig market that they wanted. And so it could be a location-based gig market that is targeting certain audiences. And we were really allowing workers to have a lot of control over the type of gig market that they defined. And also the governance rules. I'll share the paper that we developed there. It's we did like a short. This is still ongoing work, but yeah, we have been working on that space.
Thanks. Just a follow-up question. I think that's fascinating, and I'm looking to do something similar with sort of more macro tasks like freelancing platforms. But I wonder what was the process that you followed to, like, did you get like workers to sort of co-design this platform, or was it more throughout the research that you've been done throughout these years? Like, maybe, can you talk about more the process?
Yeah, we were we had interviews and surveys with workers to start to understand some of their needs. About like what is stopping them, for instance, from creating their own businesses. One of the things was a lot of them lack these technical skills in order to create their own marketplace, and so we aim to make it very simple for them in order to create their marketplace. Another thing was also the type of things that were important. So how we structured the information. So some of the things relate to the governance of the platforms. Other types of things relate to the pricing. And so we did surveys and interviews with workers to understand the type of features that our tool should have in order to help workers to be able to tailor their marketplace. I'm looking for that work, and I'll share it.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Andrew?
Thanks. Yeah. Saiph, this was wonderful. Thank you very much for this conversation. I think we all really enjoyed it.